Mountain biking technology has progressed at a rapid rate. I mean, look at this. This is a 22-year-old suspension fork from RockShox. It doesn't even look that bad, does it? I mean, it still looks pretty beefy, pretty burly. At least it does until you pitch it up against a modern equivalent. Look at the size difference. Isn't that insane? Yeah, so these are similar forks, 22 years apart. So today we're going to take them apart, have a closer look and see exactly what has happened in 22 years of modern day technology advancements. Wicked. Okay, so firstly, before we start taking it apart, let's have a little overview of these forks and we'll see how different they actually are. So this is a RockShox SID. It dates back to 1998. Originally it was an air sprung fork. This one's a bit different. We'll get to that in a minute. It was designed, super integrated design is what SID stands for, to be the lightest cross-country race fork available. 63 millimeters of travel, designed for 26-inch wheels, a maximum of 2.2-inch tyre in there. No disc mounts on the early ones. Quick release mount at the bottom, so none boost, of course, way back then. So you're talking a regular 100mm on the bottom here. They're actually titanium hardware for the brake bosses there. And it used to have a heavily machined crown. Now on this particular one, it's a little bit different. The owner of this one had this custom made by the RockShox importers back in the day. And it's got a SID external and it's got Doddy SL internals and crown. So it's actually got coil springs on the inside. So this one is a little bit heavier, but arguably this could have been the answer to a downcountry fork back then. It's got coil springs and it still feels all right. Now I actually rode this on a GT Shazang in a GMBN challenge video a while back and I was actually quite amazed by how well it actually performed. When that SID came out, it was a really advanced fork, and hence it's a really good base fork to talk about in this discussion. As far as materials go, it's got magnesium lowers, alloy upper tubes here, known as stanchions. They're hard anodized as well to keep them quite slippery for good action, machined alloy crown and a steerer tube. Okay, now on to that 34. Now the 34 is the modern day cross-country fork in the Fox range. You can get 100mm versions. This one's a 120. It's just what I have at hand, but it's the same exact fork. It's only travel that differs. Again, on the outside, magnesium lowers, but a lot beefier and burlier. That's Boost 110, of course, with the big 15mm axle and a post mount for a disc brake on there. No cantilever mounts here. You can fit a 2.8-inch tyre in here if you were to fit a 27.5 plus. This is actually a 29er fork and I had this on a 29er bike. 120mm travel, so double the travel, but still on a cross-country bike. You know, things really have progressed a lot. Aluminium uppers, aluminium crown, all machined out. It's tapered steerer tube, unlike the straight steerer tube that you can see on that SID. The actual upper tubes here, the stanchion, is a little bit different. They're called Kashima coating. We're going to get to this in a minute when we take the forks apart. You can see it all, but it's a huge fork, but really when you see this on modern bikes, it's quite slim and slender and ties in well. Of course, this is designed for 29-inch wheels, really. The bigger size wheel bikes, of course, when you see it on there, it's quite fitting. Whereas back in the day, running a little 26-inch wheel, it's quite comparative. Now, you might think that this would be quite a skinny, weedy little fork, but it's not that bendy. You know, it actually handles really well considering. But 29-inch wheels, especially with what we're doing with terrain these days, they put a lot more stress through components as well. It's bigger, it can have more deflection, so accordingly the fork needs to be bigger to reflect that. 34mm stanchion tubes on here, much bigger, versus 28 on those little SIDs. All right, enough waffling. I want to get these apart and have a look inside. So let's start taking them apart. We'll lay them out on the desk here and we can actually look at what the real differences are between these two forks. It's nuts, isn't it? 28 years between them, and that isn't even that bad, but well, it's a different class really compared to that. That's quite an astonishing performer by all accounts. Right, to the workshop. Although, hold on, I'll just take back my hand rubbing there off glee. I didn't weigh them. I should weigh them to let you know what they weigh. So, bearing in mind that the original SID was air sprung, so it would have been a lot lighter. This is the 26-inch one with coil springs in here, just a reminder. We'll do this in kilos, just so you can get a hand around this. So that is, don't know if you can see, that is 1.47 kilograms. And now for the surprise, bearing in mind that that's 26-inch, this is 29. It's a much bigger fork. And this one here, 1.72 kilograms. So that's mind-blowing. It's twice the travel, it's almost twice the size, but nowhere near twice the weight. That is astonishing. Right, back to the workshop. Okay, so I have that RockShox SID in my stand here, ready to take it apart. Now it's important to say it's a pretty simple process stripping down a fork. It's going to be identical for both of them, except they just have some different components. On the outside you've got your lower legs, known as the sliders, and on the inside you've got your upper legs, known as the stanchions. On the inside of the lower legs you have a shaft that connects the bottom of this fork to those inner legs. Now they're normally done up by nuts or bolts at the bottom of the fork. You need to undo these and then you need to shock them loose in order to separate them on the inside, because sometimes they just stick together. It's the same principle on all forks. Now these ones don't have any sort of damper that has an open bath in them, so I don't need to worry about that. We'll talk about it with the Fox. Just going to take out the adjuster for the damper on the bottom though. Now in this case it's a 5mm for both of these, so it's pretty simple affair here. Like I say, it's the same principle on all of these. Note that I've got a load of kitchen roll down. I've put way more than usual, actually just to make it a bit easier so you can see from both angles here, to make the fork stand out against the workbench. I would normally just have enough to cover the parts I'm going to put down afterwards. Okay, so I'm going to use the Allen key here just to shock the lowers. There we go, there's one side done. And that's the other side done. Now in theory I should be able to just remove these now. Oop, another turn. Okay, so damping leg and spring leg. Now you should never hit the nuts directly or the bolts depending on what you have. You should always just hit the actual Allen key doing that so you don't damage anything. Okay, so now I have those off the bottom, I just need to carefully slide, there we go, just to slide these off. Now a little bit sticky actually, we will sort that out when we put them back together. Okay, now just be careful to slide them off the bottom here. And there we go, so that is the lower legs away from the uppers. Okay, so I'm going to do a full job on these, so let's take the boots off. I'm not a fan of rubber boots, but they were definitely a thing in the 90s that people seem to like and become a bit weirdly obsessed with. Like I say, always try and layer things out in the order that they come off the bike, so you know where exactly you are with things. Okay, so let's have a look at these inner rods. Right, so first things first, let's take these out of the clamp, because I'm going to need to just undo the stacks on the top here. In this case, I think that's probably about a 22mm. I haven't got one to hand, but I have got my trusty adjustable pliers. There we go. Didn't think they were going to be loose because they are actually plastic at the top there. They just support the core springs. Okay, so these, as I said earlier, these are actually a conversion and they have a core spring on the inside. So you'll see that coming out now. Oh, there we go. Oh, filthy, look at that. All right, so dual rate as well. So it's got a medium and a hard. That's kind of cool. Probably explains why they feel so good, to be honest. Typically you just use a single spring, but having a dual in there is quite good. And away they come. And the next one comes out. Just like that. Yeah. Okay. Alright, next up is to remove these rods. So this side has got a damper in it. Sorry, this side's got a damper and this side is just a blank. This would be your air leg on an air fork, but this one obviously has coils in it. Okay, let's get rid of that and next job. Okay, you just need to remove these little circlips that hold the, there we go, hold the damper in place. Now that should be free now. I might need a rag to hold it. I should be able to get the damper unit straight out here. Another little washer. Now in these older forks, I mean, because this is a Doddy internal on here, these are an all-in-one. They used to be plastic dampers to start with. I'd be interested to see which one this is in here. God, I can't even grip. Here she comes. Yeah. Oh, well gunked up. And there you go, that is the damper unit from one of these early forks. It's mad how small that is. So that deals with your rebound and your compression all in one. Non-adjustable compression, you'd have to adjust that internally. That's not something I can take apart. These old ones seem to be a fixed cartridge. You can adjust the rebound via the bottom. Literally you would just put the Allen key in there and there's your adjuster for making those adjustments. But yeah, pretty cool. Okay, so Okay, so that is the SID Doddy crossbreed fork taken apart. Not much more to say. I'm just going to pick you up here and give you a little show. Okay, so you have the shock boots here that go on the outside of stanchions. You've got your stanchion or your CSU unit, so it's your crown steerer upper unit. Got the coil spring stacks that go on the inside. We've got the damper. We have basically just a dummy shaft, 2 spacers, 2 circlips, a bottom out bumper there, your lower legs, your foot nuts. This one's the hollow one that goes for damper, and then the little Allen key that adjusts it. Kind of cool. All right, so let's get the next one apart. I'm going to give these a bit of a clean as well, so you can see exactly how they compare to the other forks when I get them all alongside each other. Back in a minute. Okay, so now I have the Fox 34 in the stand. Same exact principle for taking the fork apart. There's a couple of things to say. You've got to take care because you've got an air spring in here. So I'm going to do the air spring afterwards. I'm actually going to remove this because the air spring actually keeps that rod or the shaft at the bottom of the leg connected. So I'm actually going to do that first. Do that last even, if I speak English. You've got to take the rebound knob off, and because of the design of Stepcast forks, which we will look at in detail a bit later, you do need a special tool from Fox in order to remove the lower legs safely, but it's the same principle other than that. So another thing to mention as well, just as I'm taking these apart, just using the socket here just to remove those foot nuts. There's obviously a bit of oil in the bottom of these lower legs. You don't get that in the older forks. It's just lubricating oil, and there's not much in there. It varies on the fork, but between 5 and about 15 cc of that stuff. So you do need to take care when you just take the lowers off. You need something to catch them with, catch oil with. I tend to use a couple of old camping cups because they're easily washable and usable again afterwards. Okay, so let's get this rebound adjuster off. Unclick, and there we go. You need a nice long 2mm, by the way, for that if you're doing this one at home. Okay, and keep the little 2mm bolt safe in order. Okay. Next up, let's just get this one in here. This one's a bit of a different fit. There we go. So traditionally you would use these foot nuts basically and with a socket to shock the lowers free. You can't quite do that because of the design of these with the internal. So this is why you need that specific tool. There we go. So the crush washers will still be on the bottom in there. Just pick it up with that. Nice. Okay, so foot nut from each side. Now what you need to do is take that special tool, thread that on to the bottom here, and you use this to shock the lowers free. So screw all the way in and then out a bit. You give this a good tap. Okay, now the other side. And like I say, you've got to be prepared for oil to go everywhere. So I've got my fork over a load of kitchen towel. You're going to want something similar, and you're going to want to catch the oil in a vessel as well. So hopefully I won't need to go back and re-tap that. That should be done. So if I just give this a little, yep, there we go. There's one of the crush washers from that leg, and here's the one from that leg. Something important to say, those little crush washers, when you're doing a fork lower leg service with a modern fork, you should replace these because these are actually a seal, and the whole point of them is they crush, hence the name crush washer. So you should replace those. Let's get this out of here for a second. And I'm just going to drain that oil directly into these cups here. Maybe mess it up, never mind. Like I said, it's not too much that comes out, and the older your fork is, the more horrible it is, but this is a brand new set of forks, so that oil looks great. Like I said, it's just lubricating oil, so there's nothing to worry about. Back in here. This is why it's really useful, even if you haven't got a vise or anything at home, to have a mobile work stand, because you can use it like this for so many different ways. This is a Park one. It actually came with a big ground plate, but I've actually drilled that out and put wheels on it, little caster wheels. So Slowly slide those legs off. There we go. And again, keep everything in the same order so you don't forget anything, although they're fairly simple, you don't have to worry about too much of that stuff. Okay, so now, as you can see, you've got your upper leg unit, your CSU, just the same as your lower unit, and you have an air leg and you have a damping leg. Damper leg, you can see it moves nice and slick. In fact, if I put the damping on, just for you'll see it's really, really hard to move, as it should be. Now the air leg, you could barely move that because you're actually trying to use what would take your body weight normally. So now it's time to release the air from there. The best and most efficient way to do that is by using a shock pump, because you can actually do this correctly using the valve. Some people would just depress the valve manually, but the official line is use a shock pump for it, so you don't damage anything. And next special tool, or next sensible tool that I need to talk about, is what you need to take this off. You're going to need a dedicated socket. It's a 26mm for this. It's a 28 and a 32, I think, for the bigger forks in the range. Use one that's a 6-point rather than a conventional style one that you get for cars and things. Make sure it hasn't got chamfered edges. You want a flat edge. This is actually a Fox one, so it won't slip, basically. Get that undone, and then you can take the top of the air leg out. I've just removed the little clip from the bottom of the air leg here. Next up is to carefully remove this, because sometimes you get air trapped behind here, so let's just yeah, okay, that's all right, that one. Load of grease on here. One of the culprits you get from the factory sometimes is the grease makes its way onto the other side of this and actually blocks the port. So these have a negative and a positive spring inside them, but it's charged via one port, unlike the original SID. The original SID had dual air on it, so you could inflate it from either end. It was good because you could tune the way the bike felt, because you could technically increase the negative spring, making it feel plusher, to a degree anyway. But this new system works great. Okay, now for the damping leg, I just need to remove the adjuster on the top, and then it's back to that nice socket again to take it straight out. It's just a case of removing the damper leg now. Now this is very cool, wait till you see this. This is one whole big damper. And there we go, that is the damper. So I'm just going to set it down here so you can see everything. So you've got your upper tubes, your stanchion tube, your CSU. This is the damper unit here. Then you've got your top cap, which has got your compression adjustments on there, and then the bolt that holds it in. Top cap for the air leg. This is your air volume spacers. That is your air piston, or your air unit, basically. That's a little ring that keeps it in place. Your sliders, or your lower legs. Then you've got your crush washers, your foot nuts, the rebound dial, and then the little bolt. Cool, right, so I'm going to lay this all out on a table, and then we can see exactly how different this stuff is. I mean, you can see already it's quite different, but let's look at them side by side, because I want to tell you a few things about how they work. Okay, so we've got the forks stripped down. Let's have a little look at them off the bike then, so you can see what you make of them. So I've got the sliders here. This is the lower leg part of them. Obviously there's still bits and stuff dripping out. Look at the size difference. Like, they are just tiny by comparison. 28mm stanchions versus 34mm stanchions. Substantially stiffer, and actually I think a lot lighter if you consider the fact that they're bigger travel, they're for bigger wheels. Comparatively, it makes them lighter, and a lot stiffer as well. And they do need to be stiff, not just for ultimate stiffness, but to be able to cope with the terrain that they're riding. Fore and aft, you know, you need that under braking stiffness. You of course need torsional rigidity for cornering performance. You're running bigger wheels now, there's just more stress going through forks, and that's definitely just reflective of what's going on. Again, tyre clearance, 2.2 was pretty big in these days, pretty much unheard of, whereas here you can run up to 2.8 if you really want to. Not sure why you'd want it, to be honest. Big fan of 2.4, so that kind of works well for me, but each to their own. But internally, they're not going to be too much different. So they're both made from magnesium to achieve a similar effect, nice and light for what they are. They've both got rubber seals on the top. Of course, the seals today are much lower friction and just generally work a bit better. They're better sealed and they're lower friction, so win-win. They're going to have bushings on those inside of the legs. Of course, there's going to be different amounts of overlap. One of the cool things about this Stepcast fork, the whole reason it's called Stepcast, is literally from here, it's a hollow fork. And as a result of that, you're losing a big part of the fork that weighs a lot. The internal components are slimmer and shorter. The same with the stanchion tubes, they are shorter on these compared to the regular 34 and other forks. Whole point of these is they're ultra light. Not much else to say about these. Let's move on to those upper legs, because this again also is quite a different story. Okay, onwards to the upper legs. So this is the stanchion tubes, the crown, and those steerer tubes. Very different here. So you've got a tapered steerer tube versus a regular straight one. That enables more support at the front end, more stiffness fore and aft under braking, which is needed when the forks are that much longer because of the leverage placed in the front of the bike. No brainer, absolute winner. Same with the whole design, the bigger squat design of boost up front. You know, when forks were pre-boost on 29s, they looked really skinny. Well, they were really skinny, but now it all just looks like it fits in a bit better. Yeah, no contest there. Of course, these do look quite cute in an old school kind of way with those little 28mm skinny stanchions at the top. Unfortunately, they were covered up with the shock boots, which became a popular addition to suspension forks in the 90s. They just weren't as well sealed. But there is an argument for saying that by running shock boots, you can actually hold more muck and grime against the seals because it can't get out again. So it kind of goes both ways. If you're really into your maintenance, I wouldn't bother using these, but if you're not, they are actually kind of useful. Comes from the moto world, so some people like the look of them, but I like to see what the fork is actually doing. Now, this is the interesting thing. So these have just got regular hard anodized aluminium tubes here. Nice and slick, and they work, and they're very functional. But the Kashima coating on the Fox forks, very different. So these are impregnated with something, if I say this right, with molybdenum disulfide, and that is basically a form of it's got an oily sort of substance to it, and it's basically impregnated into the anodizing. And as a result, they're extremely slippery. Now this gives you a really good slick action on a suspension fork. Now some of you might question why you would want this on a suspension fork when motorbikes don't use it. Motorbikes just have hard anodized, or even just stainless steel, of course, you get on motorbikes. But moto forks are full oil bath forks. They've got oil in there that glides up and down the entire time when the fork is operating to make them a slick action. As you'll see in a minute, both of these have a cartridge design on them. So it's to your benefit to have the slickest action possible, which is why we always say here at GMBN Tech, you should look after your forks and keep them nice and clean because they will operate better. But hey, no brainer there. So 34mm, and this is, bearing in mind, still cross-country fork. This is quite small. If I was to put this up against the new Fox 38 or the new RockShox SID, it would look skinny and tiny, kind of like this. And that's pretty insane to think that you've got a 38mm fork with 190mm travel, and then all the way down to this, which is 28mm. But yeah, okay, right, so let's look at the important stuff, the insides. Okay, so on the RockShox, you've actually got coil on here. So I did say that the original SID came with an air unit in it. This one's actually using the Doddy SL from the same year. The internals basically, so you can get coil sprung in there. Now, as you can see, there's two different coil springs. You've got mediums and firms, so kind of progressive, which is actually very cool. And there's not much to it other than that. That is the spring unit. You can adjust the preload on it by adjusting these dials at the top here, and you would see it moving up and down in there. Preload doesn't change how firm they are, it just changes the force required to start them moving. So if you have preload, it'd be good, for example, if you don't like them bobbing around too much, something like that perhaps. But essentially these gave a really plush ride, and they're very small and very lightweight. Just to show you by comparison, this is a coil spring out of a current Z1 Bomber, and that probably weighs more than both of those. Look at that by comparison. This is one of the reasons you don't see coil springs quite as much on modern day forks. They've still got that amazing supple feel that these actually have, which is quite surprising given how odd they are. But they're added weight and there's less adjustability. The air spring systems, as you can see on the 34, there's a lot more going on here. Now this is it, it's pretty simple. It slides on the inside, air goes on the top here, and air goes in this chamber here. So this is your negative chamber effectively between these two. There's a quad seal there, and there's an O-ring there, and this would screw it into the top of the fork. And these green things are air volume adjusters, sometimes called tokens, air volume spacers. Essentially, they're reducing the size of that chamber by each one you put in. So these, I think, are 10 cc's, maybe 20 cc's. You get different size ones. But the point is, you're putting these inside and they're reducing the air volume in there, so it's going to make the fork ramp up even more. Air is naturally progressive, so arguably it's a better spring system to use on bikes because it's infinitely adjustable. Coil springs, yeah, okay. For reducing fatigue and for ultimate grip and comfort, coil springs are incredible, but they're less adjustable. It's harder to get them exactly right, and they don't suit as many people. and they're heavier. Air springs for most part are better for most people. And these modern air springs with the extra volume system on them is incredible. Now, one little thing just to say about these. So you've got the negative chamber, which is between here. This is obviously sealed away inside the upper tubes, and the positive, which is on top of here. They're charged via the same Schrader valve at the top of the forks. And there's a little dimple on the inside of the legs that allows the air to bypass and fill that negative chamber. When you're filling it up, it is part of that process. Whereas with the original SIDs that have the air spring system on, the ones that actually these ones don't, that actually had dual chambers. It had a separate valve at the bottom of the leg to inflate the negative and one at the top of the leg to inflate the positive. Those that didn't know how to use this would run too much positive and the fork would feel very linear and quite harsh. If you balanced it a bit better and perhaps even went a little bit more in that negative chamber, they would feel incredibly plush. However, you put too much, they start creeping down in travel. Very fine line there. But yeah, essentially that is the Evol system from a Fox 34. And in this case, this one wins. But even though this one does win, I've got to say I was astonished by how well that fork rode when I rode that GT Shazang with these forks on. I couldn't quite believe how well it tracked, how it did bottom out, but it was just a firm bottom out. It wasn't a harsh metal to metal, really nasty clunk going on. But astonishing, consider it's 22 years old. Give us a slack. Great, cute, small, all the rest of it, but that's the future. Okay, so onto the actual dampers in these forks now. There's absolutely no contest here in any way at all. Modern forks are incredible compared to what we had with very basic damping to start with. So granted, the SIDs with the coil springs in this particular fork felt amazing. But this is the little damper that goes in the bottom. So this one is one of the metal ones. The earlier ones were plastic and they used to leak. So you would adjust your rebound from the bottom end here. This one had no adjustable external compression. It was just however it would be valved for the rider. Bit of cavitation actually filling on this one there. Like you can, there's a little void going on. Very basic, and that must have got extremely hot and offered extremely inconsistent damping. But kind of cool that it does both compression and rebound in, well, I've not seen one that actually works like that, to be honest. I've not actually taken one out to see myself, but very basic. But let's look at the Fit 4 system that's inside the 34. So this is a bladder style system. So when I compress it at the top, this basically can expand to allow room for the oil that's displaced through the system. Now it works on the same way as a Fit 4 damper would do in a modern day Fox fork. In fact, RockShox do the similar systems with their charger damper using the bladder at the top. It's incredible, it works really well. You've got adjustment on the top here with the top cap to adjust it in 3 positions, open, mid and closed, and you can adjust the low speed compression there, and then the rebound will be adjusted at the bottom of the leg. So that's 3 points of adjustment, like very, very adjustable to get basically the exact ride qualities you want out of a fork. I can't emphasize enough, you know, the structure of the forks and the overall design is kind of not far off, but the damping really is just leagues different these days. Now watch this when I just compress that, and you can see that contracting. Quite cool, isn't it? In fact, if I go too far, you can see it go the other way. But the cool thing about this particular one is in that Stepcast fork. So just to explain something, the SID was the lightest suspension fork in the world when it came out. Basically, it was designed to be the lightest, most efficient. That was with the air spring in it, not the coils like the one I've just shown you. And the Fox 34 Stepcast is also designed to be the lightest. When they first brought the Stepcast technology out, it was on the 32, which is their out and out XCO fork. That's kind of moved aside now, and the 34 replaces it because things have got a bit bigger, a bit burlier. It's 29 everywhere now on the XCO race scene, so the reflection has to be slightly bigger. However, it's extremely light, and this is a revised version of the damper system. There's basically, it's been machined down. There's a lot less of it, and it's actually a lot shorter as well, thanks to the overall design of the fork. And the only other oil you need on the inside of the fork is purely to lubricate those bushings as the fork slides up and down, and to keep those seals lubed, and also to act as a barrier to keep out the bad stuff. I mean, modern forks, absolutely incredible, but pretty surprised with the old RockShox, to be fair. It's not a bad old thing. Well, that's pretty much all there is to it when you're looking at these two kind of similar forks. Same but different, you know, 22 years apart. You look at these with the quick release mounting versus that axle, the stance, everything about this thing, and you think that this must have been extremely bendy, but it wasn't that bad. Bearing in mind the forks were using smaller wheel sizes, 26 inch versus 29 inch. You think the weight penalty for this is barely anything. By today's standards, I think these are literally incredible what they can offer. But you got to hand it to RockShox for doing this stuff in the early 90s and to start with, and then coming out with this in 1998. A really capable fork that's actually quite surprising. So hopefully you've enjoyed this little video looking at retro versus modern in terms of forks. Again, there's no comparison with what you can do on a modern mountain bike, but there's something still quite nice, and it's kind of good to look back and see how things have changed over the years. If there's other things you want me to do retro versus modern and compare, if there's anything you want me to open up and have a look inside, let us know that as well, and we'll see what we can do here at GMBN Tech. As always, don't forget to support us. You know, we need your help. Let us know what you think in the comments. Ask us what you want us to make, all these sorts of things, and we'll try and make it happen. All right, I'm going to put these back together again and go for a ride. See you later.